A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 167th episode of Together for Education webinars brought to you by Notebook. Just over 2 years ago, when the pandemic had just set in and schools had closed down, we at Notebook felt it was our duty to set up a platform for educators to connect meaningfully on, discussing problems they were facing with the rising need of digital education and online learning, and arrive at common solutions. Today, 166 episodes later, this platform has grown much bigger than we had anticipated, all thanks to your love and support. We have discussed extremely curricular topics here like digital learning and NEP and assessments, extracurricular topics like sports and theatre, topics like school finance, and even evolved topics like mental health. Our school education system is undergoing a huge change. The NEP has been the formal culmination of years of changes that our schools were already putting into effect with a focus on 21st century skills. As we prepare our young students for a VUCA world, the schooling system also embraced variability in a big way. We moved away from rote learning into more of internalizing and deep understanding. One of the tools that saw the earliest change was the way we discussed topics with students. Pop quizzes with binary right or wrong answers made way for questions that invited discussion, discourse, and debate. They became more open-ended. Today, we seek to understand how effective open-ended questions are, what some of the best practices should be, and most importantly, learn from our expert panelists how their evolution into this new system of conducting classes has been. Our first speaker today for this topic is Mr. Philip Burrett. Mr. Barrett retired as the Deputy Headmaster from the illustrious Doon School in Dehradun after 44 years of serving in education across various institutions. Mr. Barrett served the Doon School as Housemaster, Head of Department, Dean of Activities, Dean of Student Welfare, Deputy Headmaster, Second Master, and Acting Headmaster with great distinction. He also carried out a visioning exercise for the Doon School in the year 2011 through an in-depth study of a number of British public schools and various schools in the US. Mr. Barrett qualified as a leadership trainer at Wellington College, UK in the year 2000. He's also an athlete, an adventurer, and a naturalist. And we at Notebook are privileged to have Mr. Barrett as our senior advisor. Sir, thank you so much for sparing your time to be here today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Subayo, and a very good evening to everyone at Notebook and our esteemed panelists and guests who have tuned in. Yes, it's an interesting topic because at the heart of every classroom interaction are questions. The Greek scholars used the Socratic dialogue, which was based on inquiry and searching for answers. The word educere, from where the word education comes, is actually a bringing out of what is within. It is not shoving into a child. It is bringing out from a child. And what better way of bringing out from a child than asking questions? Good teachers learn to develop good lessons based on questioning. Now, a closed question is based on much on the why, the where, which, and how. And they prompt very brief answers. And they're important too. Multiple choice questions, tick the box answers. These are all examples of closed questions. But put briefly, open-ended questions are the ones that require more than one answer and choosing from more than one option. These questions require longer responses. And they can also come in the form of a speech or an essay. And they also encourage longer conversations. Questions such as who said this and who was talking to who test the skills of recall and are fine at lower levels and lower classes. But as we climb the ladder into higher level skills, we need to test for evaluation, for creativity. And it is here that open-ended questions are required. Questions like, what do you think would have happened if the hero failed to win the battle? Or how do you know when you're on the North Pole? Or how would World War II have been different if Japan hadn't bombed Pearl Harbor? So these are open-ended questions. And if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, which most teachers are very familiar with, remembering and understanding are lower level skills. And they can be tested by yes and no, questions that the response is yes and no. But finding when it comes to create, to evaluate, to analyze, to encourage higher level skills, this is only brought out by open-ended questions. Things like designing, constructing, planning, producing, inventing, justifying, a decision or course of action, hypothesizing, critiquing. These are only tested through open-ended questions. And I must say that it is very easy to ask a closed-ended question. You don't need much preparation for it. And therefore, teachers generally ask closed-ended questions. It takes a lot more planning and pre-work to ask good open-ended questions. Now, asking an open-ended question in the classroom demonstrates how the teacher values the children's opinion and genuinely wants them to share their ideas. It also helps the children enhance their social skills. Open-ended questions in classes prevents monotony and boredom of a subject. It also provides a fresh attitude. It tickles the interest of the students. It builds academically on the subject that the teacher is handling. Open-ended questions are the kinds of questions that are very subjective. They're lengthy. There are often no one right answer. Encourages children to think creatively. And open-ended questions are just never one-word answers. Now, some examples are, what do you think this picture is telling us? What do you learn from this lesson today? What is the best thing about you? What makes a good friend? Do you think your friends like you? What do they like about you? These are simple open-ended questions. Children love them. Now, there are many advantages to open-ended questions. The first is that there are limited possible outcomes. They encourage a limited or infinite number of possible answers. Sometimes you get answers that you don't expect. There is no one right answer in most cases. It also collects more detail. You get complex answers to complex issues. Sometimes an open-ended question is the only way to collect the answer you need. In a situation that requires complex description and explanation, a simple yes/no will not be enough. And if you're asking someone to explain a decision or a report or a problem, an open-ended question works best. It also encourages self-expression. It gives room for children to express themselves, and they'll sometimes surprise you with their eloquence and their knowledge. We also get to know much deeper into a child's way of thinking. We can assess a child's brain much better with open-ended questions. Sometimes, we ask a question without knowing the answer ourselves as teachers. And it's our way of learning. It's the students actually give us the answers. Open-ended questions offer a lot of advantages in situations where, we don't know the answers. And using open-ended questions helps in getting a perspective from different people. It gets shy people to open up. It's great conversation starters in any domain. Helps us to think critically. And it also evokes a sense of wonderment and curiosity. It also improves out-of-the-box thinking. It improves linguistic skills, language, how to handle language. It's also more fun, much more lively. And it gives us more detail into the subject. Now, children benefit from being asked open-ended questions because, again, as I said, they have creative minds. They don't want to just get up and say yes or no. They want to show their creativity. However, like everything else, open-ended questions have their shortcomings. It's time-consuming. Sometimes a teacher has to finish a syllabus, and it's time-consuming. Sometimes less hands go up in a class because not every child has the eloquence to give you a long answer. Very difficult to compare two different long answers from children. Sometimes a lot of irrelevant information or beating around the bush takes place. Hard to pinpoint and hard to analyze, and therefore hard to judge whether the student is actually understanding. Closed-ended questions, on the contrary, also have their place in the entire gamut of learning. Much quicker. You get a quick answer. it helps the teacher along because it helps the teacher to understand whether the kids are following. They can quickly scan multiple choice answers, select one, send and press on tick. It gets the answer you need. So it moves the lesson along much faster. Instant feedback from a student to a teacher is important. More children take part in simple close-ended questions. Open-ended questions, because they hand over the control of the response to the students. Sometimes what happens is a teacher doesn't get the answer one is looking for, and you get vague answers. And sometimes the answer is so full of fluff and full of chaff that you are not getting to the point, and you sometimes can veer off topic, and you might lose focus. It could be very irrelevant to the questions, and this is very important. One has to stop the student and say, "Listen, you're going off target." It's difficult to compare and correlate with so many long answer questions. I think one has to balance long answers. You ask short answer questions, which are closed questions, and you have to balance this with an open-ended questions. I think sometimes it isn't the question itself that matters as much as the answer options that the children provide. If you ask what sounds like a closed question, but you allow free response, you can still get additional information. A simple yes/no answer can become yes, but, or no, why? And so the respondent can have more to say on the topic. So even closed questions can become open questions. Closed-ended questions ask you to select from a list. And you won't end up with answers that you weren't expecting. So it's much easier to handle a class with closed-ended questions. The other thing is that when you ask an open-ended question as a teacher, you have to be very patient to listen to the answer. You can't be short and move the child along, because you've asked the child a question. It takes a long time, and so you need to be patient. You need to be listening. Close-ended questions offer a bird's eye view to the topic, and are often the best way to start. I would ask teachers. I would give teachers a few tips. One is, I think most teachers should be very clear in what is an open-ended question and what is a closed question. I think they should create open-ended questions before the lesson starts. While it's very simple to ask a closed-ended question in the course of the lesson, I think it's very important to prepare your open-ended questions before the lesson. There's no such thing as the best time to ask an open-ended question. You could ask an open-ended question to start a lesson, to get them excited about it. You could ask it at the end of the lesson. It's also beneficial to ask open-minded questions when you feel that the subject is dry and that the atmosphere of the class is getting a bit dull and boring. Asking open-ended questions toward the end of the class can be a great way to sum it up, to finish it, and leave the children thinking and imagining the possible outcomes. What would have happened if? When I was teaching Lord of the Flies, which is a very important text by William Golding, an open-ended question was, what would be a chapter that you would put in before the start of the book? If you had to write a chapter before the first chapter, what would it be? And there's so many questions that you could ask open-ended. It also gives the teacher an insight of what may or may not be working for the students. It gives the teacher the scope of improving their methods of teaching in order to provide good learning opportunity for the students. See, I think eventually students loved asking questions and they love being asked questions. And I think finally, I'll end with saying it's more important to ask good questions than getting answers. And with that, Shivayu, I'm going to hand this over. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to hearing the expert panel and Achin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for sharing that wealth of experience with us. Your experience with open-ended questions really has thrown the forum open. And what my main takeaway was that open-ended questions, sir, as you said, really makes the students think and not just remember. I think that's a huge advantage there. We would go over to our other panelists and see how they feel about this. Thank you so much. Our next speaker today is Achin Bhattacharyya. Achin is the founder and CEO at Notebook. A chartered accountant by training, Achin was a director at Deloitte prior to starting Notebook. He has worked in India and abroad in various senior capacities in GE, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. He is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, a fellow of the ICAI, and a member of CPA Australia and CPA Ireland. He is also the recipient of the prestigious Indian Achievers Award. An avid reader and a passionate traveler, Achin has keen interests in economics, history, literature, and philosophy. He is a regular speaker at various forums and chambers of commerce, and also contributes articles to numerous publications regularly. He is also on the board of some of the most renowned corporates and contributes significantly to their brand strategies. Achin, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Sure, I'm audible?
Yeah, Achin, loud and clear.
I once again welcome all of you to today's session. A very interesting topic indeed. An open-ended question, we would all agree, allows the audience to respond to the question based on their own individual understanding and experience, which might vary from person to person. Unlike a closed-ended question, where the respondents are provided with a list of options to choose for, at times, it may narrow down to a simple yes or no. So the detailed and elaborate information received from the audience in case of open-ended questions creates room for further discussion and improvement, which I think is the most important part. It acts as a trigger for many interesting thought-provoking discussions. And of course, creates scope for learning for the researcher. For example, if it's a marketing survey or any other research for that matter, as well as for the responder. Because in this particular question type, the researcher has the freedom to ask why and how, which takes the entire thing to the next level. And it opens a platform for conversation. It helps us understand the thought process of the responder, where he or she is coming from. And again, in open-ended questions, response definitely may vary from person to person. So some unique perspectives are going to come forward, which again will act as trigger points for further probe. It will give direction to the research. And say, for example, if we take a more holistic view and discuss about something like market research, for example, where open-ended questions play such an important integral part. Because very often such surveys depend on open and subjective type of questions. It gives the responder the opportunity to freely write their review and opinion. They're not tied down. Because at times, the questionnaire may be designed in such a way that it's self-congratulatory. Only good aspects are probed. However, in an open-ended question, the responder has the freedom, the flexibility. And the best part of it is the responder feels important, feels his or her own opinion is valued, it's empowering. And that, I guess, the best part of it. So if you look at some examples, for instance, in a typical interview setting, for example, a question like, what do you think you bring to the table? How do you think you can make the organization grow? What are some of your past projects that you've worked on, and how do you feel you have contributed to the same in your earlier organization? So very, very open-ended questions, right? Or a new person joining the team. A very simple question like, how are you feeling about your new job? A one-line question. But the answer might be as elaborate as the responder wants to give. It can be looked at from various aspects. Or in case of marketing surveys, a simple question like, how was your experience in our store today? So we are not tying down the customer to one specific aspect. We are not asking him that, are you happy with the kind of time you spent in the billing queue? We are not asking him that, are you happy with our merchandise? We are asking him, how was your experience? It's a blank canvas. He or she feels empowered. You can go ahead and, whatever your, be it your suggestions or grievances, you can go ahead and express. Or in a personal setting, say, for example, a question like, how do you define your relationship with your friends, with relatives, with your colleagues? So open-ended question, I believe, definitely influence the respondent. It's a very, very strong influence to share their view and opinion with you. And as I discussed, it makes them feel valued. And they can actually share their feedback without limiting their thought, without any inhibitions. And that's very empowering. So there's a study which was conducted by one of the eminent players in this particular area by Pew Research. And the respondents were asked, of course, this is in context of US, the respondents were asked, what mattered to you most while deciding how you voted for the president in the presidential election? And the same question was asked in two different ways. One group was asked this question in a close-ended question format, while the other group was asked the same question in an open-ended question format. So in a close-ended format, few specific options were given, and the last residual option was others. Say you don't find your pick, go for the last residual option. And in the open-ended format, it was the blank canvas. People were allowed to express themselves. And the results were very interesting. In the close-ended format, 58% of respondents, I repeat, 58% of respondents chose the economy. Whereas in the open-ended format, only 35% wrote an answer that indicated economy. Now, what does that prove? We'll come to it in a minute. The other thing that I wanted to discuss, only in a close-ended format, only 8% respondents selected the residual option, which is others. Whereas in the open-ended format, almost 43% wrote a response that would have been categorized as others. Now, what does this prove? What does this result prove? It proves that it's common human psychology that when we are being provided with a list of options, very often we try to fit in. And out of the options that are in front of us, we try to find out that which one is most important for us and pick. And very few of them were actually thinking of other things, and that reason only 8% chose others. So economy was maybe a popular reason. But when it came to the open-ended part, we see a significantly lesser number of people chose economy. And so many of them gave varied responses, which were not there in the list, and that would have come under others. Of course, each individual is unique. They have their own interesting perspective on it. But it goes on to show that by using open-ended question, the researcher gets to understand the true feeling of the respondents. So it's about different thought processes. It's about individual suggestions, and it's also about getting a peek into their inhibitions. So an open-ended question is a form of qualitative research. You can ask an open-ended question when you actually want to establish a platform for better understanding. But why do we use open-ended questions? So some advantages we already discussed. Few others, no limit on the answer, right? The respondent has a liberty to include details about any aspect. So be it about feelings, attitudes, and views. And that usually wouldn't get submitted in a close-ended question. It's like a blank canvas. The respondent is really free to choose. They get a platform to voice their opinion. The other aspect is it allows us room for creativity, which is very important, because it's not only about filling something just for the sake of it. Imagine a marketing survey. You are stepping out of a shopping mall and someone comes, a young guy walks in with a t-shirt and asks you, sir, can I get 30 seconds of your time? Maybe 2-3 questions and 3 or 4 options to choose from. Of course, it's convenient, it's faster. I agree. But at the same time, very limited room for creativity. So most often, people get into a mindset of just filling it out, just for the sake of it. So at times in open-ended question, respondents may actually stun us with their vision, with their creativity. Some great suggestions may come. And there have been various instances in the corporate world wherein responses that have come from users have actually defined the future trajectory of the product and in turn the brand and the company. The other is, of course, open-ended questions allows us, of course, to expect the unexpected, because at times, since you're giving complete freedom, people may come in with completely unique perspectives, which you haven't thought of. Maybe great marketing tips, which are very grounded, very practical, very creative ideas. Other is, at times when we are conducting a research or a survey and the situation is very complicated, honestly speaking, close-ended questions may not be able to do justice to it. Open-ended questions are far more suited. And also, of course, it helps us to understand our clientele better, because there are twin objectives of any survey. One objective, of course, is to understand how the client is, whether the client is satisfied or not with regard to the particular product, etc. So that's the inward-looking approach. But the outward-looking approach, which is equally important, is to understand the clientele better. And we get to understand them better only when you let them express themselves freely. And of course, there are some limitations as well. I think Burrett referred to one of the very important limitations, very difficult to analyze. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at a huge sample size, say in a particular city, maybe 1 million people being interviewed in a metro city or across, say, 4 cities, and then we try to tabulate the data into an Excel sheet and into some tables and chart for executive review, for review of the CEO, or for example, in a government setting for review by the decision makers, senior bureaucrats, or chief minister. Of course, it's very difficult to categorize, systematically categorize. So the objective is to categorize information into tables, chart. Open-ended questions may prove to be a little difficult. The other is, at times, too many responses can actually harm, because the other aspect is, for example, if there are too many open-ended questions in a survey, people may feel it's too long and drop off. Imagine walking out of a shopping mall and someone coming in with a long form, maybe 5-6 open-ended questions. Honestly speaking, 95% people will drop off. 95% people are in a hurry. So I think a very judicious mix of open and close-ended questions are required. And again, I'm discussing from a more holistic perspective, not confined to K-12 space or schooling. So I think at times there's a turn-off effect, unless until we very judiciously try to maintain a balance between close-ended and open-ended questions. Also, it may lead to gathering of irrelevant data, which we are not looking for, some statistical outliers. Now coming to the more important aspect, and if you have a more bird's eye view with regard to the use of open-ended questions in education. I think some aspects of it, very practical aspects of it, Burrett referred to, which is decades of invaluable experience as a very senior educator, as an eminent educator. And I'm sure we have a panel here will again come up with their own ideas, unique perspective, which I look forward to hear. A few things that I want to briefly touch upon. So there's no doubt about it that most experts feel, even in the academic world, whether it be in terms of K-12 or in terms of higher education, that open-ended question invites students to give longer responses. At times, yes, it helps to demonstrate their understanding. And in some settings, it's preferred in comparison to closed questions. Of course, assessment might prove to be a challenge. It might be more time taking. Again, it differs, it varies. Both of them have their own individual advantages and disadvantages. But of course, it's better for aspects like discussion on aspects which are subjective, which each student will try to interpret in their own way. Now, yet some experts argue that this is a false assumption. And as I said, that subject to subject it might vary. If we are discussing about something like a subject like literature, and that too discussing about intricacies of, let's say, for example, a Shakespearean play or a beautiful poetry, and especially at a senior level, honestly speaking, close-ended question might be difficult. But again, some experts argue that this is a false assumption. And this is based on their central arguments that there are two kinds of open and close-ended questions, grammatical and conceptual. They argue that educational practitioners should be aiming for questions that are grammatically closed but conceptually open. I repeat, grammatically closed but conceptually open. For example, in a very simple question, say someone is asked, is it ever right to lie? Now, it will be regarded as a closed question, right? Because it elicits a response which is either a yes or a no. How it is conceptually open, any initial yes or no answer to it can be opened up further for further probe. Now, why do you think that? Could there be an instance when that's not the case? Inviting elaboration and inquiry. If your lie actually saves someone's life, would you go ahead? Again, it becomes subjective. So starts with a close-ended question, but leaving broader scope for further discussion. So this kind of grammatically closed but cognitively open style of questioning at times gives educators best of both worlds: the focus and specificity of closed questions, and in the same time, the inviting, elaborating character of an open question. So closed questions simply require opening up strategies to ensure that conceptually open questions can fulfill their educational potential. So I think that was one aspect that I wanted to discuss. And I'm sure that esteemed educators in this forum are very well aware about the pedagogical invention. A lot of literature is around this particular concept of open questioning mindset, OQM. I was going through some of them, which refers to the development in educators of an open attitude towards the process of learning. And the questioning is at the heart of that process. I think Burrett has started his beautiful deliberation with that particular line. That questioning is so important. So it's a mindset that is applicable to all subject areas and all pedagogical environments. It encourages a style of pedagogy that actually values genuine inquiry in the classroom. Now, the other point that I want to discuss, and I think it's very relevant and very important, is about constructivism as a concept, which is an approach to learning that holds that people actively construct or make their own knowledge, and that reality is determined by the experience of the learner. So, and it's very different from the passive view, because passive view of teaching views learner as an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge. Whereas this particular approach, constructivism, states that learners construct meaning only through engagement with the world. So, of course, the other aspect is that, so that goes on to prove that thought-provoking discussions, open-ended questions, which are like triggers for thought-provoking peer-to-peer discussions, are so important. Wherein an esteemed educator plays the role of a mentor, of a facilitator, and indeed encourages learning as a more social activity, something we do together in interaction with each other, rather than as an abstract concept, as also mentioned by John Dewey. I remember one of his writings. And many eminent academicians, philosophers in this particular area, even Vygotsky believed that community plays a central role in the process of making meaning. Because at the end of the day, I think each individual, although all the students are taught in a group, but each individual has their own way of learning. And the inference that children draw at times are very unique and also influenced by the socio-cultural setup from which they come. So I think open-ended questions actually create that entire platform, create that entire ambience where they can actually develop, they can thrive. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is something that and every individual has a distinctive point of view. Knowledge at times is very personal, especially at senior level, based on existing knowledge and values. So these are some aspects that I wanted to discuss. And we are a very senior panel here today, a wonderful panel. I look forward to their deliberation on this important topic. I thank all of you for giving me a very patient hearing. Over to you, Shubhai.
Thank you, Achin. Thank you for that wonderful deliberation on this topic. As Achin mentioned, we have an experienced educator lined up who will talk about this topic next. But before we do that, a little bit about us here at Notebook. We at Notebook are an EdTech platform. We create short videos pertaining to the school curriculum, which means that for every topic of your school syllabus, you would find videos available on Notebook. Now, these videos serve two very important purposes. One is when you as a teacher are beginning a topic in your class, whether it's online or offline, you could use these videos to trigger the first discussions. The first set of open-ended questions can be framed after the 6 to 10 minute long video is played. Next, when the student is revising the topic at home, months later after the class, they have access to these same videos on their personal devices. Be it a laptop or a smartphone, they can watch the videos over and over again until they get a very clear idea of the topic. What I'm going to do now is play you a short snippet of one of the Notebook videos so that you get a better idea of what it is all about.
He is so sure of his daughter's consent to Lomov's proposal that he grants it on her behalf before he calls her. Chubukov's eagerness and excitement about marrying his daughter and Lomov suggests two things. Considering the play is set in 19th century Russia, the daughter is well past the age of marriage. Affluent families in Russia bonded with other wealthy families through marriage unions. They did this to enhance their social standing, estate, and property. Here's a question for you. The proposal was written in 1888 to 1889. Do you find the marriage conventions in India similar? Chubukov goes to call his daughter. Lomov reasons to himself about the necessity of this marriage. He weighs Natalia's qualities: an excellent housekeeper, not bad looking, well educated, and also thinks of his advancing age. This makes him conclude that it is high time that he married. Marriage into the Chubukov family would be the soundest decision. Before Natalia enters the scene, we get a glimpse of Lomov's hypochondria. He's also an insomniac and goes numb from time to time. We next come to Natalia's exchanges with Lomov. She too goes overboard with her hospitality towards Lomov. The way Lomov starts the proposal is significant. He mentions their family ties and the property they have owned and inherited. Before he can ask for her hand in marriage, they get into a conflict about whose family owns Oxen Meadows. We find out from Lomov's words that Oxen Meadows is a piece of disputed land between the Birchwoods belonging to the Chubukov family and Burnt Marsh. It was given to the peasants for free use by Lomov's aunt's grandmother. The peasants used to return the favor by making bricks for her. The peasants had worked on the meadows without supervision as long as 40 years.
Well, that was just a short snippet of one of the Notebook videos. This one pertains to the play, The Proposal. If you head over to our website, www.notebook.school, or visit our mobile apps for iOS and Android, you would find more than 10,000 such videos at your disposal. Well, with that done, it is now time to introduce the principal that we have with us today, who's going to talk to us about the use of open-ended questions in his school. Mr. Aman Kumar Nirala is the principal of Xavier's English High School in Jamshedpur. He himself holds an MSc in physics and a B.Ed. He has 14 years of experience in teaching and 5 years experience as an administrator. He says, and I quote, "The future lies in the hands of individuals who are ready to learn all through their lives. The understanding and acknowledgement of this fact alone by all the stakeholders in the education sector, that is parent, child, and teacher, will bring about commitment and qualitative change in the teaching learning process." Sir, thank you so much for sparing your time to be with us here today. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Already, the Philip sir and Achin sir has explained very nicely about the open-ended questions. That means open-ended questions empower our students to take decisions about how they think, what do think, and how do they decide. Open-ended questions encourage extended responses as opposed to yes or no questions. That means one word answers. They invite the children to reason, reflect, and think. First of all, when the teachers they are asking the open-ended questions to the child, the conversations shift from the teachers to the child. And while some children are used to this type of inquiry, other need to practice and become the comfortable and verbalities their the thoughts and opinions. Sometimes when the teachers they are asking the open-ended questions, we know about the potential of the children. In open-ended questions, when how they decide to encourage the children to take about the something they are doing, help them articulate the decisions making process and following with the what they are doing. How else could they do? Provides a lot of opportunities for the children's practice responsible to these type of questions and make sure you wait for them to the answer. That means open-ended questions when the teachers they are asking. The children either they are in the groups or they are we are asking the individually, they are deciding, they are considering and creating a questions. This type of questions that means practice always
Sir, I'm really sorry, but I think you have gone on mute. If you could please unmute yourself.
the list of generative open questions, the prints them out and how they are asking with the help of the
Ladies and gentlemen, our apology. I think Mr. Nirala is facing some technical problems. Mr. Nirala, if you can hear me. So your camera is off and your mic is on mute.
Am I audible?
Yes, so we can hear you. So your
There is
camera
a
is off.
network issue, networking issues.
All right.
Engage it one-on-one selves and particulate. Encourage the children to ask throughout the day and model throughout the answers. Additionally, model asking of the answering the questions with other adults and classrooms. For examples, encourage back to forth the enhance when the asking about the open-ended questions. Really, it is very helpful. It is the essential part that is key role of the classroom. That means teachers they are asking the open-ended questions. It creates teachers and students interactions are the key focus of a class by creating a clear visions, beginnings, and sense readings and leverages of the foundations, knowledge of the qualities of the interaction.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. I think your mic is again on mute.
why it's happening. But while asking how and why questions is a vital part of supporting language and concept development, it's important to remember that we cannot have effective interactions with these questions alone. Thus, when the classroom is beautiful, then it is the very, very nicely and about.
Sir, my apologies, but we can't hear you at the moment. Mr. Nirala, sir, are you there? Mr. Nirala, sir, are you there?
Actually, there is the network issue. Sometimes net's coming and.
So sorry to hear that, sir. Well, I'm sure everybody on the panel over the last 2 years, we've all become all too familiar with network glitches and how it affects our delivery. We'll just give it a couple of minutes and hope that Mr. Nirala's connection situation improves. Unfortunately, we seem to have lost contact with Mr. Nirala, sir.
He is having some network issues. He called me just now.
All right. Would he be joining back?
I guess no. I'll just try again.
He's just joined.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just give him a few minutes. Mr. Nirala, sir, if you're there. I guess not. Ladies and gentlemen, our sincere apologies. I believe the connectivity situation today is not quite conducive to having the session from Mr. Nirala. I'm sure you have more questions and you would want them answered. What we would request you to do is please reply to the email that was sent as an invite to this webinar with your questions, and we will try to get them answered as much as we can. For now, I must thank our speakers. Barrett, sir, thank you so much for that wonderful start that you gave us. I think your entire discourse about the advantages and the disadvantages, the various formats that open-ended questions can take really added a lot of value, particularly for all the teachers and principals on this forum currently. Achin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. You came at it more from the corporate standpoint, the holistic standpoint, but I think it holds true even in the K-12 segment, particularly since open-ended questions are perhaps a format that K-12 borrows from marketing research. Mr. Nirala, if you can hear me, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We sincerely apologize for the technical glitches, and we sincerely hope that you'll be back on this platform soon to share your thoughts further. To the audience, once again, thank you so much for being with us today as well as you do on all other weeks. It is your love and affection that keeps us going. We look forward to having you at our next session. Until then, please take care, stay safe, and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Achin and Mr. Bayu.